Hello everyone, welcome to Shop Dev Tips. So today in this video we're going to have a look at the dynamic type in C#. So let's begin with an introduction. So the dynamic keyword, so it was introduced in C# 4.0, basically in .NET 4.5. So it is a static type, okay, but an object of type dynamic bypasses the static type checking, which means that all the type checking is done at runtime. Okay. A second property of this type is that in most cases it functions like an object type. Okay, but the underlying type is changed once the value is assigned to it. And as compared to the var keyword, it is not mandatory to assign a value during declaration. Okay, and at compile time, objects of type dynamic is assumed to support an operation. Okay, and also dynamic type escape type checking at compile time, and like I said, it is resolved at runtime. Okay, and in the traditional way, whenever you have to use an instance of a particular object, say a list, so if you don't have any particular method, say like convert list to dictionary, it does not exist. So if you type a method followed by the dot operator, so the compiler will indicate an error underlying that convert method because that class doesn't support or doesn't have any method like that. But with dynamic keyword, you can write any method, and if that method doesn't exist, so at runtime an exception will be thrown by the application, and which is basically the Microsoft C# runtime binder and runtime exception. So I will show you that in a demo. But before proceeding, let's see some classic ways how to use the keyword. So you can use dynamic similar to the var keyword or object type in C#. Okay, so but there are some difference between them. So we'll see in some moment. So you can assign an integer, a datetime, or an instance of a class, okay, with some methods that you have, okay, and this type, underlying type, will change once you assign a value to that. Okay, now let's have a look at some common usage scenarios where we use the dynamic keyword. Okay, so it can be used to obtain values for example, the COM API, for example. Okay, dynamic language such as Python, from the HTML document object model via reflection, okay, or somewhere else in the program. Okay, so now let's explore. But before exploring, I would like to highlight about the one property of the dynamic type is that as compared to the var keyword, it can be used as a type of a property or a type of a parameter in a method. Okay, so let's first have a look at the first property. Okay, so by default you can see here I've declared a dynamic variable. Okay, and in most of the cases, like I said in my slides, so it functions like a object, and if no value is assigned to it, okay, so it behaves like a object. Okay, so let's have a look by running the program. So here the value assigned by default is null. Okay, so nothing. But if I look at the watch window, okay, so see the type here mentioned is object. Okay, now we'll have a look at how the type is changed at runtime. So consider a simple class here. Okay, so I have a simple constructor, one method that accepts an integer, and a second method that just converts a string to uppercase. Okay, So let's explore what happened to the dynamic type after an assignment. Okay, so I'm assigning my dynamic type first to an integer value, next to a date, and third to an instance of a class. Okay, so knowledge should be changing. So like I showed you initially, if no value is assigned, okay, so the underlying type is object. Okay, so let's have a watch just to explore this quickly. Okay, so this is my dynamic variable. So underlying type is object, and now once I assign an integer, okay, so the underlying type becomes int. Okay, same here for the date, and same here for the dynamic class. So in my console I should be having like int32 first line, date time, and simple class. So that was it for the underlying type changes. Okay, so now let's have a look at a third point regarding the dynamic keyword. Okay, so this is very important to consider because it differs from the var keyword. Okay, I'll show you. So let's first have a look at the var keyword. Var, say my var variable. Okay, so var is mandatory that you assign a value to it. Okay, and for dynamic you don't need to assign a value. Okay, so for var, once you assign a value, say integer, you cannot assign another type of data to that variable. Okay, so see how I assign an empty string to a var keyword, so it cannot be assigned. Okay, because once you assign a value at compile time, I mean at design time, so the compiler infers it as an integer, but there's no inference for a dynamic type. Good, so that's a major difference between the var and the dynamic type. Great. So this, if you want such a behavior, then instead of the var, use the dynamic keyword. Okay, so now see, for this dynamic I'm assigning an integer, and after that I'm assigning the date, and the underlying type changes after each type of assignment. So let's have a look. So I'll just add a watch. Yep, I just delete that. So by default it is object. So it has changed to integer, and now when I change it, the underlying data to a date, it becomes a date time. Okay, so that's it for the behavior of the dynamic keyword. And next I would like to show you another difference with respect to the var keyword. Okay, so with var keyword, one line is missing, allow me. So let's explore that piece of code, but before that, with var keyword. Okay, so say I say var my class, I assign it to an instance of the new sample class that I have below. Okay, now if I do my class, okay, I have some intelligent support about the methods that the class supports. Okay, But with dynamic keyword, you have no IntelliSense support. Okay, see, I'm pressing the dot and nothing appears. No drop down list to select a class. So bear that in mind while working with dynamic keyword. Okay, so this is I'll just show you a simple invocation. Okay, so I'm declaring a variable my dynamic class bar and assigning to an instance, and just to show you that it invokes a method properly. Okay, similar to the var keyword, and check that you don't have any IntelliSense support. So here hello should be translated to an uppercase. Okay, so see, hello has been transformed to an uppercase. Okay, so that was another point for the dynamic keyword. Now let's look at something very important that you need to manage in your code. Okay, so just in case, like I said in my intro slide, if you have an operation that is not supported or a method that is not supported by the class, here I look at my dynamic variable, okay, assigned to an instance of similar class, but this I have called a non-existing method, okay, and that non-existing method does not exist in that class. It's not defined here. Notice that the compiler is not showing you an error, okay, because the resolution is done at runtime, okay, and this will show it will throw a runtime binder exception because it was the application could not do runtime binding. Okay, so this is an exception that you should manage in your code, okay, whenever you are working with dynamic keywords. Okay, so let's have a look how it works. Okay, so my method is called, this works fine, but here I'm getting like a runtime binder because that sample class does not contain a definition for the non-existing method. So that's it, guys, about the dynamic keyword. Well, you can use it normally, but bear in mind the differences and the challenges you might encounter while working with it. So a summary of difference between the var and dynamic keyword. Well, var was introduced very early, so in C# 3.0, and dynamic was introduced in C# version 4, okay, the language version. So var is statically typed, okay, can be inferred at compile time, so like I mentioned with a demo. But for dynamic keyword, it is always like dynamically typed, and the type is inferred at runtime. Okay, so whenever you declare a variable, okay, you need to assign a value to it, okay, but for the dynamic you don't need to initialize it. Okay, var keyword does not allow the type to change like we saw in the demo, so you can assign an integer, and after that you can only work with integers with a var keyword. But dynamic is different. You can assign an integer, a date, a string to the same variable. Okay, and there's no IntelliSense support with var. I'm sorry, there's IntelliSense support with var, but no IntelliSense support with dynamic. And var can only be used as a local variable. Okay, it cannot be used as a property, the type of property, or no return values from a function. Okay, neither for parameters. Okay, and dynamic, it can be used like to create properties, return values from a function, and also for parameters. So let's have a look quickly at this last point. So see here, for example, I can use dynamic. Okay, no errors. But if I use var, I get an error. Okay, so this is it. about the dynamic keyword. Okay, so if you have something like global operations, generic operations, and working with common APIs and from dynamic languages, so dynamic keyword should be uh, welcomed for usage. Okay, so that's it, guys. If you like the video, please like it and subscribe to my channel. So happy coding. Bye bye.